Hi all, my name is Ryan and welcome to my channel What the Pop, where we discuss pop culture in general and Buffy a lot. The usual spoiler alert, I may talk about things in these analyses that relate to future plot points. So if you haven't seen all of Buffy and you don't like spoilers, I suggest you like the channel, then come back once you've seen it all. Today we continue our look at Season 2 with Episode 12, Bad Eggs. A plot summary. Joy sends Buffy on an errand, but Buffy gets distracted by a vampire. She prevents a girl from getting eaten, but she forgets her mother's dress. Her mother asks for just a little bit of responsibility, and we get this.
Honestly, don't you ever think about anything besides boys and clothes? Saving the world from vampires?
Xander and Cordelia are kiss-fighting in a closet. In health class, the teacher asks about negative consequences of sex. So Xander and Cordelia continue to bicker about each other without naming names. Willow says pregnancy, and everyone gets coupled up and gets an egg to look after, except Buffy. She wasn't there. Buffy gets her egg, Giles tells us about the Gorches, Willow suggests hunting with Angel. Angel and Buffy are slaves to passion. They can't stop making out. The Gorches are watching. Buffy's egg cracks open while she's asleep and stuffs tentacles in her nose and ears. Next day, Buffy and Willow are tired. Xander is fine, he hard-boiled his offspring. Xander and Cordelia go look for Mr. Whitmore in various closets. Buffy and Angel are doing more making out while supposedly hunting. Angel can't have children. He's not the stud we first thought. The night security guard discovers something in the basement, but gets pushed into a hole. Buffy returns to her bedroom to see her egg moving. It tries to do its best alien facehugger impression, but Buffy is a more than capable Ripley. Buffy calls Willow to warn her, but Willow has already been Bezored. Joyce catches Buffy in clothes at 3 AM and she is grounded. Xander goes to eat his boiled egg, but it's a dead facehugger. Autopsy time! Cordelia and Willow knock out Buffy and Xander. Joyce meets Giles in the library and whinges about how kids are a burden. Giles attaches a creature to her too. Everyone's getting Bezored. Buffy and Xander wake up and Buffy crushes the eggs set to mind clamp them. They follow Jonathan to the Bezor pit when the Gorch brothers attack. Xander knocks out Cordelia to stop the eggs getting to the surface. Buffy fights the Gorches and the Bezor. Tector gets pulled into the Bezor pit. Buffy also gets pulled into the Bezor pit, but after a moment emerges covered in Bezor goop, triumphant. Lyle runs up, he knows he can't take her. Giles explains there's a gas leak, Xander says he'll fill him in tomorrow. Buffy gets super grounded, confined to her room, so she makes out with Angel at the window. Technically, no rules have been broken. This whole taking care of an egg thing, well, my school never did anything like this. We were given eggs as part of physics to throw off a second-story balcony, and were tasked with designing a means of allowing that egg to land safely. So we killed a lot of eggs in the pursuit of science, but never had to look after them as offspring. But I also attended an all-boys private Catholic school, so they probably just assumed our wives would be taking care of the kids because we know how progressive the Catholic Church is when it comes to women. This episode was written by Marty Noxon and is probably her worst episode. But I don't know what's happening to me, whether it's nostalgia or looking at these episodes critically changes them. But this episode is nowhere near as bad as it was in my head. Like, I have this memory in my head that this episode was almost unwatchable. Don't get me wrong, it is absolutely one of the worst episodes of Buffy, but even the worst episodes of Buffy are generally above average TV. And I suppose that's where my issues with this episode lie. It's just average TV. And I expect much better from Buffy. The plot in this episode is pretty boring, the message while on theme is shallow with very little deeper meaning, and the villains provide no real commentary to Buffy's overall journey. When you have any new characters introduced in this series, you have to wonder what their role is in Buffy's journey to adulthood, what they either teach Buffy directly, what they contrast, or what they represent metaphorically or thematically. And no matter how many times I look at them, I can't figure out what the Gorch brothers are supposed to be. Which leads me to conclude that their meaning is either way too abstract and not clear enough, Or more likely, they have no meaning. They serve no purpose in the greater story of this episode. They provide no commentary on Buffy's greater journey to adulthood, and mostly they just seem to be here for comedic relief. Which is fine, I suppose, but they take up a lot of screen time in this episode that could have been used to make the Bezor storyline much better. Having said that, the Koch brothers are probably the best part of this episode, because they are just stupidly fun, and are far more entertaining as villains than the Bezor.
I think you are afraid of the Slayer. Alright. I'm gonna beat you like a red-headed stepchild. Throw your ass out in that sunlight. Come on. You think you can? Giddy up, son.
Mostly though, they give us another set of non-generic vampires. And true to form in this show, as soon as a vampire is non-generic, it is capable of some form of love. Here it is brotherly love, and it's a very human trait. One of my favourite stories in Marvel Comics is the Secret Invasion storyline. In that story, the shape-shifting Skrulls were infiltrating superhero groups like the Avengers. So one of the big questions became, who's a Skrull? And it created this sense of intrigue and mystery, where you were examining every panel and every word to try and determine who was a Skrull. And when it was revealed someone was a Skrull, you went back over everything they had said and done, looking for the hints you missed. This episode could have left out the Gorch brothers and focused far more heavily on that aspect. Who's controlled by a Bezor? The scene with Giles in the library with Joyce, where he is Giles but not quite, he's a little bit off, is a good idea of what this whole episode could have been. Personally, I think Giles should have been a little bit more off than he was. But that sense of mystery and intrigue as they try to find out who is controlled and who isn't controlled, especially after the brains of the Scooby Gang, Giles and Willow, were taken out, well, it would have been a far more compelling and far more interesting story than the one we got. And ultimately, that is my major issue with this episode. It's just kind of boring. I can forgive a lot of silly ideas in TV shows if I'm entertained while they're doing it. But I have ADHD, and boring me is probably the worst thing a TV show can do. Though like the Gorch brothers, the Bezor doesn't really provide any commentary on Buffy and her journey either. And the story specifics of it are just nonsensical. If the mother Bezor was under the concrete in the school, how did the eggs get out in the first place to infect Mr. Whitmore? Why, when the Bezor hatchlings first crawled on Buffy and Willow that first night, did it not take over them then? Why wait? Why does Sunnydale High have so many hoes and pickaxes? And how the hell did they manage to get through solid concrete when they're using the tools like this? Now the Alien franchise influence in this episode is clear, which, given Joss wrote Alien Resurrection, the fourth Alien movie, is understandable. The Bezor hatchings are clearly modelled on the Alien facehuggers, and the scene where Buffy and her egg hatching and fights it off is obviously an homage to Sigourney Weaver's kick-ass Lieutenant Ripley. Particularly the scene in Aliens when Paul Reiser's corporate dude locks Ripley and Newt in a room with facehuggers, hoping to get one of them pregnant, so that he can get the alien back through quarantine on Earth. This episode does have some great moments though. Cordelia and Xander having to look for Mr. Whitmore in various closets, and all of their bickering interactions. Joyce's mum comment on the egg keeping Buffy up at night. The interaction between the Gorches, particularly when Lyle says he should have left Tector on the doorstep when their mama left. And Tector is so hurt. He's so the little brother and says, "Don't say that, Lyle." All the Buffy and Angel makeouts, and just the visual of Buffy emerging covered in Bezor goop, looking awesome, having killed the mother Bezor. All a great moments in an average episode. In a season where coupling and sexual maturation are a big theme, it was only a matter of time before they actually started talking about sex itself. And like most fun things in the Buffyverse, it's looked down upon. Mr. Whitmore says right from the start, it's often difficult to remember that there are negative consequences to having sex. He doesn't say that there can be negative consequences. He says that there are negative consequences. This basically says that no matter what, when you have sex, something negative will happen. We had our drinking is bad episode in Reptile Boy, we had our drugs are bad episode in The Dark Age, and now we have our sex is bad episode here. Well, not quite. This is our warning to the sex is bad episode. Our writers saying, well, we told you this was a bad idea for when Buffy and Angel do have sex. I already mentioned in What's My Line Part 2 that Spike and Drusilla represent the literal demonization of sex, and that Buffy has been warned off sex in Inca Mummy Girl to remain the sacrificial virgin. Of course, Buffy has like one toe in the horror genre, and we all know that sex in a horror movie usually has dire consequences. The sex is bad message will get hammered home in Innocence in 2 episodes' time. In this episode, the message moves forward a little. It's not so much that sex is bad, the message is very much that sex has consequences, and that you need a certain level of responsibility before you do it. Here the consequences of sex are focusing on pregnancy, and we have 2 major comments on that. First, the eggs themselves, the Bezoar's offspring, are parasites. The representation of children in this episode are parasites. Energy stealing, mind clamping, parasites. Certainly sounds like normal kids to me. Second, we have 3 other comments from Joyce, Xander and Lyle. Lyle says, so this is the thanks I get. Well, don't I take care of you? Didn't I need to raise you myself? Burden that you were? Maybe I should have left you on that doorstep when Mama blew town. When Buffy and Willow come into the library, drained and tired, Xander comments, or perhaps it's the burden of parenthood. Notice how seriously you 2 have taken this egg thing. And Joyce says to Giles, they can be such a, I don't want to say burden, but actually I kind of do want to say burden. Burden, burden, burden. Now Lyle didn't have sex to get his burden the result of someone else having sex. And in the context of this season, we'll see that the consequences of your actions may result in other people having to bear some of that burden. We saw it in The Dark Age, when Buffy bears some of Giles' burden from his actions in his youth. And of course we'll see that Giles bears a major burden from the consequences of Buffy's actions. Angel here is the only one thinking of the future and consequences, highlighting that he can't have children ever. Of course that will turn out to be false. But Buffy isn't worried here about the consequences, about the future. She says, when I look into the future, all I see is you. All I want is you. And while some people may read this as being overly teenage Twilight drivel, I don't think it is. Buffy doesn't believe she really has a future. Her concept of 5 years from now is a massive stretch of the imagination for her. Slayers just do not live that long. She's very much focused on the here and now. As she said in Welcome to the Hellmouth to Willow,
Seize the moment, because tomorrow you might be dead.
Mr. Whitmore also said, for teenagers such as yourselves, these feelings are even more overwhelming, with all sorts of hormones surging through your bodies, compelling you to action. It is a reminder that Buffy isn't an adult yet, that despite her being the Slayer, despite her having this great power and responsibility, that she is still an adolescent coming into adulthood. And we've had this stressed about Buffy quite a few times this season already. In School Bad, when Spike smells her menses, he assesses her. I smell the blood of a nice, ripe girl. Not woman, girl. He's commenting on her sexual maturation. In Reptile Boy, Buffy is trying to assert that she is mature and hates being treated like a teenager, only to act like a teenager and rebel and drink and almost get devoured by a giant penis monster because of it. In What's My Line Part 1, Giles tells her she's acting very immature, for her to reply, because I'm a teenager, I've yet to mature. Last episode was about Buffy the Slayer and her level of responsibility. Again, the whole, with great power comes great responsibility, Spider-Man mantra. And we saw that the Slayer side of Buffy is responsible and will take the consequences of her actions. This episode, however, is about Buffy the woman and her level of responsibility. And what we see right from the opening scene is that sometimes the responsibility of Buffy the Slayer intersects and overrides the responsibilities of Buffy the woman. An important message for the season finale. What we learnt about Buffy the Slayer over the past few episodes is that Buffy the Slayer is driven by passion. that it gives her fire that she needs. And in the last episode, we saw what happens when there's passion but no control. Something we were warned about in Some Assembly Required. Manners to hand, acting without empathy or thought. Here we are being forewarned about Angel and Buffy. This episode makes it clear that sex has consequences, and Buffy and Angel in this episode have this increasing level of passion. I mean, they can't keep their hands or lips off of each other this whole episode. What's funny is that when Xander says Buffy and Angel won't be getting a lot of hunting done, Buffy replies, "Please, like Angel and I are just helpless slaves to passion. Grow up." Of course, next scene, they are lip-locked constantly and can focus on nothing else. Last episode, we were warned about the dangers of Buffy the Slayer losing control of her passion. And this episode is telling us that Buffy the woman and Angel will become slaves to passion. They are going to have sex and there will be consequences. And we're being told that this is a bad idea. Xander and Cordelia, Buffy's metaphorical heart and what-if versions, are hooking up. Absolute slaves to passion. They don't even like each other. They acknowledge that whenever they're together. They know that together they are wrong. A further warning to Buffy and Angel. And Joyce comments 3 times that children aren't responsible, aren't ready for this burden themselves. So they certainly aren't ready for the consequences to come. At the start of the episode, we get, "A little responsibility is all I ask. Honestly, don't you ever think about anything besides boys and clothes?" To Giles, in the middle of the episode, talking about kids in general, we get, "Oh, they're just so irresponsible." And at the end of the episode, we get, "Young lady, you have to learn some responsibility, okay? Once and for all." Highlighted against the backdrop of Ted in the last episode and Buffy claiming that responsibility, it's kind of only here to highlight that it will be Buffy's responsibility to deal with the consequences of her and Angel. But we know that Buffy's consequences won't be the usual issues, because Buffy is not your usual woman. I'm assuming because they're undead that vampires probably don't get STIs. And we get told flat out in this episode that vampires can't have kids. The worst STI there is. So there are no little vampirelings in Buffy and Angel's future. So the consequences have to be something else. And of course, we find out just what that is in 2 episodes' time. As I said at the start, this episode isn't particularly deep, and its meaning is pretty obvious, so there isn't much else to discuss. Lyle and Tector Gorch are the names of the characters played by Warren Oates and Ben Johnson in The Wild Bunch, where they pretty much do destroy an entire Mexican village, though they don't make it out of that movie alive. Lyle, last seen running from Buffy, will return in Season 3 as part of Slayerfest 98. My favourite quote in this episode is this one.
Can I just say, yeah?
I see your yeah and raise you a yeah.
Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell. It helps the channel a lot. You can also help by subscribing to our Patreon. We have tiers starting at $1 or buying a t-shirt or something else at our What the Pop Redbubble store. If you disagreed with anything I said or have anything to add, please put it in the comments below and I'll see you next episode.